I'm tremendously interested in that side of life, but design and architecture and how they flow together and how design makes architecture work for people's real lives. And I love this flat. I think it's completely wonderful. And I can see that you've changed it, haven't you?
Yes, and what we're sitting in now is the servants' wing, and there were 5 rooms in it, and an outdoors lavatory, and a passage, and I just flung the whole thing into a kitchen. A lovely kitchen, because I like having a sofa in my kitchen, and I don't like being cut off cooking for other people. I like hearing what's going on.
I think it's completely brilliant. And the one thing, if you get them right, flats of this period, purpose-built flats of this period, work much better than conversions. I live in a Victorian conversion, a slice of cubit.
This is 1934. And it's a Bauhaus flat, and I think it's really beautiful.
It is really beautiful.
And quite rare. And this is a large one. This is a 5-bedroom flat. But again, I've knocked a lot of the bedrooms down. One's a walk-in wardrobe for me, one's a huge bathroom. That leaves me just an office, a bedroom, and a guest room.
Well, I've done pretty much the same.
Really?
Yes. I ostensibly had 3 bedrooms, and now I've got one enormous bedroom and one tiny bedroom. A bedroom so tiny, I can never ask anybody to stay in it.
Well, you can ask them if they just want to sleep at night.
Yes, but they won't want to. So I'm successfully repelling all borders.
Yeah.
You grew up in design, didn't you? I mean, you've been ahead of the curve for decades, but you started with design and with art school.
I started at art school, yes, and then I worked as a designer until I was 30. And I worked running a business which was really fabrics for architects.
Yeah.
And we had a small mill in Lancashire which was making British stuff. It had to be designed especially for the job. And I remember there was one ship called the Oriana on which I designed 5,000 yards of fabric on it. And then again, I like to get architects and give them unique things for whatever job they were doing. And we got Vickers Viking Airways, the whole fleet, doing the interior fabrics for it. So we did hotels and hospitals and big work, you know.
And just at the moment that Britain was turning back on to design.
Yes, really. Nobody knew what a designer was when we started, because I was married to Terence, and at that point, before then, first I'd been a model, and then I was really made a PR, and I didn't even know what a PR was in those days, but it was massively paid, much better.
I bet you picked it up in time.
And you see, Terence at that time, he had just one room in a basement making his own furniture, but I had, I was known to Fleet Street, and they were very nice to me always in promoting Terence. Somebody once said to me that before Terence and you started your company, you couldn't get a plain silver teaspoon in the whole of London. It was all sort of embossed, fake Queen Anne teaspoon. And I think that was very much so. And I was very interested in Terence as a designer before he had any. He had just one picture about the size of a stamp in the Architectural Review of him with a chair, and I immediately fell in love with it. And then when I saw that chair, I said, "That's Terence Conran's design, isn't it?" And the person I was asking, although I didn't realise it, was Terence Conran. And that's how I met him, and later we got married. So And then we had two sons.
Then you
who
had
were
two
both
sons.
designers, Jasper
Yeah.
Conran and Sebastian Conran, yes.
Kings of their fields.
Absolutely, yes. Sebastian's a product designer, and he's a double professor, and Jasper is also a professor. And I think that's much more the exciting.
It's terribly exciting.
Yes, for your children to be professors.
And I can remember them both as, I was going to say lads, but pretty young guys.
Yes.
Back then.
Yeah.
And Sebastian being involved with Punkland.
Yeah, that's right. Sebastian when he left school and went to the Central, he was the only person in the Central in the first year who had qualified in maths. So he got an A-level in maths. So he was made treasurer of the school. Yes. And as treasurer, he had to organise anything that cost money, and that was in reserving the Sex Pistols for their second gig, I think, and the Clash for their first gig. And then the Clash liked Sebastian's design so much that they wanted him as their designer. And he came and asked me, designing the record sleeves, the advertising, their clothes, their situations on stage. And he came to me and asked me if he could dump being a student at the Central and go off and be a roadie. And I thought it would be a big jump into what running a business was like.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Did he ever go back to Central?
Well, I think he's a professor of design all over the place. Well, I haven't.
You are a fellow.
I've only got one fellowship, but that is obviously.
But it's a pretty grand one.
Yes, it is a pretty grand one. And then I was an OBE at Well, which I liked. And that both of them really were for. Well, the UCL one was for all the design work I'd done and the writing work and the editing. And the other one was for the first time I did voluntary work, because when I retired, which is when I was 65, which is about 1998.
I didn't notice this actual retirement. I don't think it really
happened. I was only
happened.
retired for 3 weeks, and then I found out something that needed doing, which was the Work-Life Balance Trust, because it seemed to me that all the women I knew, especially women with children, simply had a terrible time trying to keep a job. So I went in for it, and basically I had a very small committee, and they were mainly either high-class PRs or high-class journalists. So that it was very easy running that 12-person committee. And what we wanted was flexi hours for offices and factories. And that's what we got after six years, which wasn't very long to produce it. Because journalists came to me to ask me about design in Europe, or worldwide really. And then after I was design consultant for the Daily Mail, they offered me the job of home editor. So really I was very lucky in that was my first job as a journalist. And I never even considered being a writer, but it was just what suited me. And then a year later, I was woman's editor for The Observer, because they wanted me to start a new magazine. And so then I went back to the Daily Mail, then I went back to The Observer, then went back to the Daily Mail again. So really I was very lucky, especially because the Daily Mail was just so professional. I started Female 50 years ago in the Daily Mail, and they were very helpful to that. It was a 16-page issue that went in once a week. And our first article, I think, was the first article about women's liberation in Britain, although we hadn't heard of it at that point, but it was how we felt.
In the Mail?
Yeah, in the Mail. And
it's quite difficult to think of that now,
yes,
isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think they wanted female advertising, and they realised they could get a lot of advertising. I could do anything I wanted, and I used to work with the designers on Saturday to get a page that could not be altered and could not be copied by other newspapers at that point.
Because this
So
is
that
the
was why
beginning of British consumerism, isn't it?
It's been,
And you had to, for that,
absolutely,
you had to have women.
Yes. And also it was the first time we were allowed to say where something came from and how much it was. Marks and Spencer's, £4 for this lingerie. Or because I wouldn't do it unless they let me.
Mm.
And I was very much speaking from a reader's point of view as well as a writer's and the designer's point of
And
view.
were you being a little bit subversive, smuggling in stuff which wouldn't otherwise have made it in a popular mid-market newspaper, and smuggling in ideas like women's lib? That was a bit subversive.
There's also a rather saucy idea that no designers at that time were paying any attention to the woman's behind. So we had a picture on the very first page of a woman's behind in a pair of tight jeans. And we were saying, this is the spot to watch.
Well, it's well before the Kardashians.
When I was 36, I caught ME. And so I had to resign at the Daily Mail. So as I hadn't at that time done any housework, and as I couldn't afford to have a housekeeper or a cleaner, I started writing notes to myself about how to clean my home. And it was very difficult at that time because I couldn't really walk very well. But anyway, then a friend of mine at the Observer phoned up, Patrick Seal, and he said, I've sold your book. I said, what book? He said, the book you're writing on housework. I said, oh, those are only notes for myself. He said, I've got the cheque from the publisher in my pocket. I said, right, I'm writing a book. And that was how I started.
And that was
Superwoman.
Superwoman.
Yes. And Patrick and I never really understood why it was so successful. It went straight to #1 for about 19 weeks, I think. And then Patrick said, well, you're taking the responsibility away from them and they only had to do what was necessary to keep it done, to keep the house clean and running well. And he also said, of course I tried by looking at all the other books that had been written back into the early 1800s to find something to crib, but they were all cribbing each other, even back to Mrs. Beeton, who was cribbing people who had written before her, and they hadn't really tried everything. So, of course, I did, and I think that's one of the reasons why what I do is successful, because I will write about nothing without trying it.
So, reader, do this, it works.
Yes, exactly, yes.
And then
lace.
And then, I mean, again, before the curve, before I have to say, even Gilly Cooper, you went from non-fiction bestseller, which taught people how not to waste time on commonplace things, how to get them done.
Yes.
This works, do it.
Yeah.
And then you did what people now call a bulkbuster.
Well, I think they only called it a bulkbuster because publishers were, and I'm afraid journalists, were so jealous of the amount of money I made, because it was my first fiction, and it was about, and I'd actually been researching for a book for young teenagers, 13 and 14-year-old girls, about sex, because I was impressed and disgusted that they were getting totally the wrong information from what was being printed at that time. I then thought, it's going to be very boring writing another book for girls. I'm going to write a novel and I'm going to have a juicy time and enjoy it. So it took me 18 months to write, and I did enjoy it. And I think it did give a correct vision to teenagers of what sex was like and what they should think about it and how much they should put up with and what they should not put up with. Everybody wanted me to continue in that area, but I never did. I only ever did what I wanted to do, and that was because I felt attached to it and important to me. And so I thought I could write it better than anything else. So I never wrote what people offered to pay me a lot of money to write. I always wrote what I was most interested in. And then I wrote for 20 years fiction. I didn't really want to be that successful. I wanted to do whatever I wanted to do, and I thought I was very lucky to be able to afford to do it with my own money. One book always financed the next one. And then when I started doing voluntary work, then the money that I'd made in books absolutely was spent, especially in maths, on researching it. I also founded the Maths Anxiety Trust, and I think within a few months we will have what I hope will be the best website in the world on maths anxiety, because I've been researching it myself for 15 years, and I've also written a maths book for girls in year 9 who were the ones I feel the closest affinity to and who I've worked with for the past 10 years. So I know what they want, I know why they don't get it, and I know that children are blamed for being bad maths students. It's not that they're bad at it, it's they're badly taught. Why are they badly taught? Is that to do with teachers? Is that to do with books? That's what I investigated, and also how much publishers are involved and politicians are involved. And it's quite much more complicated than the first voluntary work I was interested in. But then I think because I'm more of a researcher, I'm a sort of journalist researcher, and that's like being a Rottweiler researcher, whereas it seems to me that maths researchers are more likely to be dachshund researchers, that if something, they don't want to rock the boat and upset other people, then they don't look into it. But of course journalists do. Mm. And very often if your research is all going like that, and then journalists see that it's going off in a nasty way, very expensive, journalists will follow it, but nobody else will.
And it can be a very good combination. If you've got people who've got the inherent knowledge and the backstore of research, and then you put a Rottweiler-like journalistic researcher on them to keep them to the spot and focus what they can do, well, you've got an ideal combination, which is what you did. You took academics and made them do the things they ought to be doing.
Well, some of the top academics are utterly wonderful mathematicians, and I was very proud to be working for them. They were very supportive of me. I think it was because I was able to say and do things that they weren't able to say and do without upsetting other people who were more powerful. So you really didn't want to upset powerful people because they could be very nasty and fire you.
So we all owe you you've paved the way for a more numerate population,
yes.
Particularly women.
Well, it's not only women. Women is very important, yes. But you see, it's also, if 1 in 4, 26% this year, it's gone up. It's worse than ever. People have failed, children have failed their school leaver maths exam, 1 in 4. And so they think it's their fault. I don't think it's their fault. I know it isn't their fault, and I can prove it. Also, as I think I might have told you, parents are considered responsible for children's maths homework, which they shouldn't be. Children have these really very dull maths books, and I've been working with children since 2009, so that's 10 years at the moment, And last year, Professor Margaret Brown and I did research of 2,000 children at Langley Park in Kent. And we got them to write us something. And the children never ever thought that what they were writing would be read. It's quite clear they didn't. But they thought maths was boring, boring, boring. And I have never heard any other word used to describe maths. And they were really rather defeatist. Professor Dame Celia Hoyles did her thesis when she started in 1982. And when I was reading that, I was struck by the fact that 40 years later, the same thing were being said by children to Margaret and me. And I think that that's because nobody to this point's taken any notice of the children.
So here we are, Shirley, surrounded by things you've done that have had a profound effect on people and a profound effect across the world, things that have sold terribly well. And here we are with a sort of roundup in the Daily Mail of female, because it was recently, just last year, 50 years since you launched Female, and here they are, the Daily Mail, gone to town, pages and pages and pages of stuff about Female and this racy cover, and a very long and very fun piece by you about what it was like and who was involved, and Female's manifesto from 50 years ago. The things women are supposed to want to read about are generally decided upon by a man, and you're saying, not this time. And talking about women, she loves her husband and children, but she doesn't want to be a doormat. She's as bewildered as a chameleon on a tartan rug. I think it's the most wonderful. Trying to be a wife, mother, mistress, chauffeur, cook, washer up, accountant, general dog's body, and sometimes wage earner. Well, things have moved on from then. And then Superwoman was the next decade, wasn't it? That was
Can I just
sort of late
say
70s.
that Female's first article sort of made the situation for women's liberation 2 years before women's liberation started.
So that was 68. 1968. And then Superwoman was 1975. And Lace was 1982. And then, in the next decade, you became a social entrepreneur.
Yes.
It's taken me a while to gather what social entrepreneurs actually do, but I think I understand it now, and it's being businesslike about creating opportunities and change.
Yes.
And you've done all those things. So, looking at this great range of very successful and important things, here's the Eamon Andrews moment. Which is the bit you're proudest of?
I think it's money stuff, because that's online on iPad, and it's 1,000 pages, but it's designed by me as well as written by me, and it's 50% visual. And of course, it's written very carefully and researched very carefully and checked out on children until children stopped criticising. And this actually, when I finished it, it was written for the girls I was working with, which was Year 9 girls who didn't like maths. So I had to interest them in maths. And I did. I did it at a 1,000 girl school called Langley Park in Kent. And after I interested them, we had question time, an evening for their parents and themselves, on really how maths was going to affect their future and their spending. And This was extremely successful, and the head teacher said she'd been snowed under by emails the next day saying how much they enjoyed it, which I thought was very important, interesting parents in why your girls should do maths and why it should be enjoyable to do. This I'd done earlier, and this was a 9-minute film of the girls that I first taught maths to, and why they enjoyed it and what they liked about it and why they wanted it. So I was just feeling my way, really.
Shirley, you've been ahead of the curve for decades now.
Yeah.
You started off as a design pioneer in the design culture of the 50s, then you became a design consultant, and you became a design journalist, and then you became a journalist,
Yeah.
female, The Observer, and then, still ahead of the curve, you did books.
Yeah.
And you started off with a self-help book, very important category in its time, and then you did big books, big novels, big juicy novels with lovely settings and lovely things and lots of lashings of sex. And then, for the 21st century, social entrepreneur for a new world, mothers in management, the work-life balance trust, maths anxiety. But the thing you found most rewarding, most psychically rewarding, not financially rewarding, the reverse of that, the most psychically rewarding thing has been maths action.
Yes, I started the Maths Anxiety Trust simply because it is such a thunderous error. It costs the country not millions, billions.
Billions.
And it is blamed on children, and it is not the children's fault. It is the people who teach the children who could do a lot better.
So, still very determined.
Yes.